begin now. Parak Bey's 72nd chapter, Lish Shlomo, of Solomon. So is this for Shlomo? Is this advice of David? Is this talking just about kings in general? All good questions. Elohim mishpatecha lamelech tein v'tzidkatcha leven melech. God, endow your king with your judgments. The king's son with your righteousness. So there's a request here that's been made for God to keep David's dynasty together and keep Shlomo with a sense of righteousness. Yadin amcha v'tzedek v'aniyecha b'mishpat, that he may judge your people rightly, your lowly ones justly. In the number of the last chapters, we talked about God being a God of the ani ve'evyon. It's not something that we saw very often earlier in Tehillim, but it's something we've seen over the last number of chapters. That sense. So here we're asking the king to do so as well. And if you remember back when God said to Shlomo, I like you, you seem to have your head on straight. What request can you give? And what does Shlomo say back there in it's probably Melachim, about Perek Gimel or Perek Dalid of Melachim Aleph. Shlomo says he asked for a heart, a leiv shomea. Leiv probably doesn't mean heart in the way we think of a heart. Why does he want this heart, this ability to listen in order to properly judge Bnei Yisrael, to listen to them and to judge them properly? So here it would make sense that this is what we want God to give. And you could think if David maybe had said this and it was for Shlomo, that Shlomo knew, or Shlomo had an idea when God asked him what he would have wanted, what he would have asked for. Let's continue. Yisu harim shalom la'am ugvaot bitstaka. Let the mountains produce well-being for the people, the hills, the rewards for those who are just. Yishbot aniyei am yoshia livnei evyon vidake oshek. Let him champion the low among his people. Let him deliver the needy and crush those who wrong them. And in those verses, again, this idea of societies is very important. In societies, you can judge your society based upon the way people judge the lowest members on the totem pole. But more so, even beyond that, a king, it's very often a king, royals, they are very distant from the needs of the folk, of the regular people. And so they need to be attuned. They can't be just in their beautiful palaces and far away and not understand and not identify in some ways and assist those who are needy. So a very important idea here within what it means to be a king. We know, of course, back in Devarim, where we're told about a king, all of the limitations that are put on a king, not too many wives and not too many daughters, not too many horses and not too much wealth. There's the understanding in the Torah, the king will be wealthy and will have more wives and will have, greater power than everybody else, but it still needs to be limited. It can't be absolute. It can't be unlimited. And part of that is relating to these parts of the people. Continue verse 5, Pasuk Hey, Yira'u chaim shemesh v'lifnei yareach dor Dorim. Let them fear you as long as the sun shines, while the moon lasts generations on end, right? So it's something that if you follow and you identify with the people and you judge them properly, then presumably they will continue to fear you. Yered kimatar al gaze kirvivim zarzif aretz. Let him be like rain that falls on a mown field, like a downpour of rain on the ground, right? Something that's successful. Rain can be a wonderful thing. And we've had chapters earlier talking about rain, the importance of rain being something that is not just for the Jewish people, but everybody benefits from, but there's rain that can be destructive. And here we want that rain, God's bounty and blessing, to be something that is beneficial. Yafriach, we're in verse 7, Pasuk Zayin, Yafriach bi'amav tzadik v'rov shalom ad bli Yareach. And let this happen so the righteous will flourish in this time, and well-being, people will be joyous all around till the moon is no more. What does it mean that the moon ends? The idea of the moon, of the waxing and the waning, the getting bigger and then getting smaller. So right, there's that idea of a sort of a cycle there, and the vicissitudes of life, of the up and the down. And so here with the idea of until there is a moon no more, we're talking about a time period where we won't have those vicissitudes, when things are only looking up and things remain steadily joyous and happy and not problematic. And there are those commentaries who later say, yes, it says to Shlomo, but really what this chapter is about a messianic era. a time of not the yareach, not the cycle, not the up and the down, but just the contentment and the joy and perhaps the miracles of the Messianic era. Continuing verse 8, V'yerd mayim ad yam uminahar ad afsei aretz. Let him rule from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. I'm sure of a verse that's very popular among certain segments of people today. Lefanav yichru'u tziyim v'oivav afar yilachechu. Let those who live in the desert kneel before him, and his enemies lick the dust. So this refers to different people. The Jews weren't in the desert. This is referring to the nomads. It's unclear exactly who it is, but it's nations that are around Israel. Israel has the deserts on many sides. Malchei Tarshish v'iyim mincha yashivu. Malchei Shva usva eshkar yakrivu. Let the kings of Tarshish and the islands pay tribute. The kings of Sheba and Usva and offer gifts. And we know that, well, according to some, again, this is referring to a messianic era. And also in many ways, we can see here why it is appropriate for Shlomo, Solomon, who the world came to hear his wisdom, bringing gifts. Most notable of all, of course, was the Queen of Sheba. Continuing Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'ishtachavu lo kol melachim, kol goyim ya'avduhu. Let all the kings bow to him, and all the nations serve him. And like we said, this is what happened. And the idea of all the people coming, Ki atzil avyon mishaveh va'ani v'ein ozer lo. For he saves the needy who cry out, the lowly who have no helper, right? And here, this is very important. This is continuing and emphasizing what was said earlier. Why is it that he's on top? Why is it that all the other kings are coming and bowing to him and offering presents? What allows him to have such success? It's because he cares about his own people. It's because he cares about the needy who cry out, those who have no help. And it continues, verse 13, in the same way, Yachos al dal ve'evyon v'nafshot evyonim yoshia. He cares about the poor, about the needy. He brings deliverance to the needy. And right, this is, again, it's a chapter seemingly about Shlomo or Messianic era. And so many of these descriptions are, of course, descriptions that are given to God. They're requests that we've seen over and over again from the author, from David to God. His enemies are around, and God is the one who is my Moshiach. God is my Ozer, right? God is my helper. God is my rock. And here, many of those similar things are being said are the responsibility of the king. And when he does so, he is very successful. Mitoch umichamas yigal nafsham v'yekar damam be'enav. He redeems them from fraud, from lawlessness, from the shedding of blood. All these things are yakar. They're important to him. They're significant to him. He doesn't just ignore them. It's so easy to ignore. And one of the episodes early in Shlomo's life, perhaps the most famous episode of Shlomo's life, is, of course, when the two prostitutes come in front of him. And while the story is, of course, Shlomo is like Jerry Seinfeld later taught us in an episode of Seinfeld, right? He's willing to cut the baby in half. In many ways, the thing that's most amazing about the story is that these two prostitutes have access to the king. They can go into the palace and they can bring their court case to the king. That's not the way it works in the world. The king is protected. The king is hidden. And certainly two lowly prostitutes are not going to have access to the king unless the king cares about the shedding of blood, unless he cares about the lowly, unless he cares about the poor, unless he is their savior and their protector. Continuing in verse 15, Pasuk Tetva, Vichi v'yitain lo mizahav shva v'yitpalel ba'ado tamid kol hayom yivarchenu. So let him live and let him receive that gold from Sheba. Let prayers for him be always said, blessings on him, kol hayom, all of the time. So right here, a request from God to protect the king, to protect Shlomo, perhaps the later kings. Yihi pisat bar ba'aretz barosh harim yirash kalvanon piryo v'yatzitzu me'ir ke'esev ha'aretz. Let the grain be abundant. Let's have grain, and it should go all the way to the top of the mountains. Let the crops thrive like the forests of Lebanon. We've mentioned it before. Of course, the Arzei Lebanon the cedar trees that were used by Shlomo to build his palace, to build the Beit HaMikdash, are the great building materials, a sign of great wealth and prosperity in the Middle East. So they're used in that sense in this chapter as well. The crops are like the forests of Lebanon. That's how great they are. And let men climb up, let them sprout up in towns like grass, right? The word, our success is going to be great. It's going to be unhindered. It's like, I don't know, maybe you have a neighbor, somebody lives near you who doesn't really take care of their lawn very well. And the grass is just goes up and up and up and up. Yihi shmo le'olam lifnei shemesh yinun, shmo v'yitbarchu vo kol goyim ya'ashruhu. May his name be eternal when the sun lasts. May his name endure. Let men invoke his blessings upon themselves. Let all the nations count him happy. We have this word here, yinun, instead of is the way it's read. The way it's written is yanin. We had that word a couple of chapters ago, and the rabbis see in that word an allusion to the Messiah. Again, here, because this chapter has this sense of harmony, the sense of protection of the weak, the idea of just everybody coming, no anti-Semitism, blessing the king of Israel, bringing him gifts, his people being successful. Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael, Oseh niflaot livado. Blessed is God, the God of Israel, who alone does incredible things, wondrous things. Uvaruch shein kvodo leolam, v'yimalech kvodo et kol haaretz. Amen va'amen. Blessed is his name forever. His glory fills the world, and we say Amen, the Amen to these verses, which we know are famous verses from this chapter, recited in Tefillah, of course. And so here we've asked that it be for Shlomo. That's presumably who the prayer is for. And you wonder if these two verses, according to some, these verses were added later in Shlomo's life when we saw these realizations happen and were offering blessings to God. So maybe Shlomo addended the verses to put these verses at the end. Maybe somebody later put these verses at the end of this chapter to demonstrate that these things happen. Blessed is God who's made these things happen, who's made this incredible messianic sort of time during the lifetime of Shlomo. There are allusions of the way that Bnei Yisrael's life is described during the period of Shlomo, earlier in his life, before his idolatry and whatnot, and before his allowance of as many wives to build their, if it's his idolatry, but to allowing his wives to build all their temples. It's sort of a messianic period almost for the Jewish people. So we see this realization. And here we have a verse that's a very curious verse at the end, which is also not, and this one is really not related to the chapter. Kalu tfilot David ben Yishai. This is the end of the prayers of David, the son of Yishai. So does that mean that up to this point were his prayers, and after this point are going to be the prayers of others, of his contemporaries that were placed in the book together? Like the next chapter begins Mizmor LaAsaf and other chapters. Is this a chapter that was, as we said the other day, 41st chapter, the end of the first book of Tehillim, here in a sense at the end of the second book of Tehillim? Is it here because this was the last of the chapters, the last of the prayers that he wrote? There are a number of different theories. Last one is shared by the Malbim, who says, right, this is not necessarily the last chapter of Tehillim, but it's talking to his son. And so it makes sense that, maybe it's in his old age. And we think about the last chapter, where at least parts of it are David in his old age, where David, right, where he says, Al tashlicheni la'it zikna, God, don't let go of me. You've been with me from the womb, from the beginning, from the youth, and don't throw me out at this point. And here, coming from that chapter into this chapter, it would make sense that then it would be a prayer for his son Shlomo, for his son to benefit. David fought all the wars, and Shlomo could have a time of peace, a time of joy, a time of harmony for all of Bnei Yisrael. And there's different ways of understanding what this last verse means, but certainly it's one that is, it's not clear 100% how to understand it, but at least a few different ideas and thoughts for everybody to consider.